Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larry Lederman, and I am the chair of the Ambassadors Speaker Series of Carleton University. Welcome to the second session in this series. I would first like to recognize the presence of some members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Ambassador of the European Union, Her Excellency Marianne Konings, the Ambassador of Estonia, Her Excellency Gita Kalmet, and I would also like to welcome diplomatic representatives from the embassies of France, of course, Poland, Romania, Costa Rica, and the High Commission of Jamaica. I'm also pleased to welcome the some former Canadian ambassadors, the former Canadian ambassador to Russia and the Ukraine, Mr. Chris Westall, the former Canadian ambassador to Spain and former Chief of Protocol, Malcolm McKechnie, the former Canadian ambassador to Colombia, Mr. Dean Brown, the former Canadian ambassador to Switzerland and the Philippines, Robert Colette, and the former Canadian ambassador to Kuwait and Indonesia, Mr. Larry Dickinson, and who just came in now, the former ambassador to Sweden and Brazil, Mr. Bill Clark. We are also pleased to welcome members of the Canadian government, including members of Global Affairs Canada, the Department of Finance, Canadian Patent Agency, Citizenship and Immigration Canada, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And especially pleased to recognize the presence of students and faculty from Ashbury College, Algonquin College, Carleton University, and the University of Ottawa. And now it is my great pleasure to ask the director of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Dr. Dane Rowlands, to introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you.
C'est un grand plaisir aujourd'hui de présenter l'ambassadeur, son Excellence, Monsieur Nicolas Chapuis, l'ambassadeur de France au Canada. Welcome to Carleton University, and on behalf of the Faculty of Public Affairs and the university and the school, which supports the Ambassador Speaker Series, welcome this evening. I think it's fitting that, given that we have a little bit of French weather for the next couple of days, that we have the ambassador from France himself, and hopefully later you might enjoy some French wine as well. So we'll have a little bit of a French theme. Every year, we at the university sit down to identify who we would like to be speaking here, and we do try and get a mix of countries and regional representation. But there are certain countries which come up more frequently as a consequence of their importance in the global system and to Canada in particular. And this is one of those cases where there is just so much on the agenda to learn from France regarding CETA, security issues, a number of files that Canadians and French have in common with respect to both their objectives and their concerns. So it is a real pleasure to have with us today the ambassador from France. So Ambassador Chapuis studied at the University of Paris, at Mongolian State University, as well as at Harvard during different periods of his career. His appointments abroad with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs include to Beijing, Singapore, Mongolia, London, and in many cases repeat trips to those locations. And his work at the ministry within Paris includes mostly a series of appointments dealing with East Asia, Asia, the Pacific, and as well as on the file for NATO and security in Europe. So a broad range of experience that we will be able to learn from today. In addition to his many ambassadorial appointments and appointments as a senior official at ministries, at the ministry in Paris and at embassies abroad for France, in 2009 he returned to France where he was named prefect of the Department des Hautes-Alpes, and subsequently he became the chief coordinator of the Wikipedia leak task force in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm assuming it was the WikiLeaks task force, which is again something that we might learn about today from his comments. And then he was appointed for 4 years as Chief Information Officer. During his career, he's been awarded several honors in recognition of his proficiency at his tasks, so including Chevalier of the French National Order of Merit and of the French Legion of Honor. And finally, in February 2015, he was appointed Ambassador of France to Canada. So we're very pleased to have with us today His Excellency Nicolas Chapuis.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure, especially to see you so many around here at Carleton at this Ambassadors Series, knowing that another of our colleagues, Roland Paris, is speaking at the University of Ottawa. So this is really a day for international relations. Esteemed colleagues, dear Larry, thank you for having me here. And I will try during the 30 minutes that I have to cover the common challenges that Canada and France do face together. Concluding the visit of my Prime Minister to Canada last week, the Canadian Prime Minister's office stated, I quote, "Canada and France are true partners and true friends, much of which can be attributed to what we share: a common language, a common history, and a common set of values." I would add personally to that statement that we do also share common challenges which lead us to build ever stronger relations. These challenges are well known, yet it may be of interest to highlight how close Canada and France stand and deal with these issues. So I will tackle four main challenges. First and foremost, of course, is growth, jobs, employment, prosperity. The second is international and domestic security. The third would have been the first 1 year back. It's now the third. It's climate change, because we have done already so much together. And the fourth, because I'm the French ambassador, is culture. Culture and innovation in the digital era. First, growth. Now, since the 2008 financial crisis, G7 countries, like Canada and France, have entered a cycle of low economic growth. And this cycle has impaired the benefits of globalization. And now, there is a widespread feeling in North America, as well as in Europe, of distrust, unhappiness, sometimes anger, directed against the political elites who seem unable to provide the same level of prosperity than the former generation did bring to their people. At the same time, this is important, at the same time, the disruptive role of new technologies tend to accelerate the redistribution of world labor. So we have two shocks. One was a financial one, and the second is technological. Industrial investment today go where the new economy thrives, where research and innovation support quarterly results, and where the cost of human capital is aligned with a high level of productivity. Both Canada and France have realized how critical the adjustment is for ensuring sustainable prosperity for our citizens. And both our countries work hand in hand in multilateral fora, G7, G20, World Bank meetings, IMF, to ensure that obstacles to the new economy are lifted, overcome in a reasoned and measured way. In that context, public resistance to free trade has shown that this necessary evolution is not yet fully understood. And the call for more protection, sometimes more subsidies, both in France and in Canada, tend to prevail over the acceptance of global competitiveness and new cooperative ventures. CETA, the Canadian-EU Free Trade Agreement, embodies this tension. We shall maybe know tomorrow whether or not the EU and Canada are set to sign the Free Trade Agreement after 7 years of negotiation. France has given it its full political support. It was exemplified last week. For we think that the time has come to demonstrate with some courage that it is not only possible, but also quite effective to enter into a trade alliance between countries that do share a common set of values. Progressive values like the dominance of the public interest, the right of states to regulate, the protection of small-scale agriculture, of employee rights, reciprocal access to public markets, and most of all, a common will to address the demands and the expectations of the middle class. Populism in Britain and in the USA, among others, manifest the real risks associated with an unregulated, reactionary, and unfair distribution of wealth. Prime Minister Valls thus invited last week the Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier of Quebec to come to Europe and help mobilize sufficient goodwill in order to turn away these demons. Second, security. These last 2 years have shaken our illusions of long-standing peace in the post-World War II era. Terrorist attacks have shed blood in France, in Belgium, in Germany, and many other countries, including Turkey, at a level of indiscriminate violence that we have not known in Western Europe since 1945. The so-called end of history, Fukuyama's end of history, has yet to come about. Not only do we face a cancer of terrorist cells that proliferate from Iraq to North Africa, we also witness war crimes committed by established states in Syria, Yemen, and other countries, created unprecedented waves of international migration. Now, Canada and France, facing this challenge, have decided to join forces. We have a long history of battling together since the First World War, and most recently in Afghanistan. What is new and most welcome and appreciated is the Canadian resolute will to re-engage its military forces in international peacekeeping at the front line of the global battle against terrorism. The Canadian Army and the Canadian government has lauded French leadership in the Sahel region in Africa, especially in Mali. Canadian intelligence is working with its French peers to trap those who plot against our democracies and our well-being. Canadian development programs are being considered to bring added value to post-war reconstruction. And Canadian diplomacy is being proactive to support our policy in Syria and in Iraq. As you have seen in this morning news, the battle for Mosul is taking place. We have been moved by the formidable expression of sympathy that followed after the Charlie Hebdo, Bataclan, and Nice attacks. Now, we are investing, both our countries are investing these feelings in concrete actions to stop the bloodshed and bring hope to the millions of refugees that camp today in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. We know that we, Canadian and French, we put ourselves in harm's way. But we demonstrate to the world that what we think and what we say are what we do. That makes Canada and France respectable and trustworthy world partners. Now let me turn to climate change. The remarkable success of COP21 last December, to which Canada's new administration had contributed at all levels of its jurisdictions, be it federal, provincial, or municipal, has allowed France and Canada to build stronger relations in the fight against climate change. The Paris Agreement has been ratified almost the same day in the European Parliament and in the Canadian House of Commons, and it will enter into force on November 4th. The recognition on both sides of the Atlantic that a low-carbon economy will provide new jobs and new potential for growth is itself an engine of friendship. We both face enormous domestic challenges to realize our intent to shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, yet we are both thrilled by the prospect of research and innovation that will result from that political effort. There's also a dual sense of ownership and of leadership that we share on this climate change front. We are the early birds in the energy transition, and we will bring to our citizens the benefit of having been among the first to raise the flag of a new economy. Last of the challenges I wanted to talk to you tonight is culture and innovation. One may remember that the UNESCO Covenant on Cultural Diversity, we like in French to call it cultural exception, just a matter of vocabulary, adopted in 2005, was the fruit of Canada and France joint sponsorship. That was a little more than 10 years ago. The cultural landscape has since radically changed, and we both face issues relative to the impact of digitalization, some say Uberization, on our societies, and the implementation of cultural diversity in a digital world. This is a very complex challenge, but both our countries see the urgency to find joint solutions and to negotiate new agreements. Basic principle is nonetheless very simple. Culture in the digital era is not and will not be a commodity, because it is part of who we are and what we stand for, and that our cultural products, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, may be traded, there will always be a component that do not answer to the laws of the market. In a virtual world where there are no more borders and where cultural industries themselves are largely dematerialized, our common capacity to create a sanctuary for the works of the mind is to be tested by the digital giants of today. I wish to note in that respect that the cultural reputation of French and Canadian digital innovators do help to make our case. You may not know that among the top 3 video game creators in the world, one is a French firm based in Montreal, Ubisoft. This is a superb example of the alliance between what we call French tech and a Canadian ecosystem which is conducive to innovation and financing in the cultural domain. To come back to the beginning of my remarks, one essential aspect of what Canada and France can do together is the fact that we share a common language, which I'm not speaking today, whose potential, contrary to what many think, is growing in this new century, largely thanks to the demographics of Africa, which will be the next economic powerhouse after Asia. We are now about 250 million French speakers in the world. That number will be multiplied by 3. We're going to 750 million by the end of the century. That is why everywhere in the world, including in Canada, including in Ontario, including in Ottawa, the demand of French teaching in primary and secondary school is going up. Bilingual Canadians, as well as Quebecers, have a distinct advantage to forward their interests, be they social, cultural, economical, in a French-speaking framework. There is a growing sense of the solidarities that manifest themselves across what we call the francophonie, which cannot be translated into English, that term. It's like the Commonwealth. So we need to make sure that this potential is not diluted, and that the new Canadians, those who are the sons and daughters of Asian immigrants, among others, are taught and educated in French as well as they are in English. We also need to understand that we hold a common interest to work together for the completion of the Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations, especially in Africa. Of course, that will be my concluding remark, we also have differences between Canada and France. Fortunately, if not, it will be a very sad world. And the most commonly debated, you've seen that in the press over the weekend, are social models. But themselves, they are the result of our different histories. I think that these differences make us stronger because they fuel the need for a better understanding of each other. At the end of the day, what brings us together is much stronger than what divides us. We are family, true friends, true allies, true partners. And thank you for your attention.
I'm Stan Aronoff, and I'm a scientist by training. I'd be very interested in hearing if you could give us some enlighten us a bit as to how you see the trade-off that is being played out or wrestled with.
The trade-offs that are being wrestled with that have come to light because of the migrant crisis, as well as economic issues such as globalization, which have led some countries to reconsider how they want to control their borders, and what's the trade-off between controlling your borders versus the free movement of people. It's resulted in things such as the Brexit vote. It's resulted in things such as Hungary deciding they don't want to accept any migrants, and other countries as well. How do you see that playing out, that adjustment playing out among the different countries of the EU and as you move forward?
Well, it is a work in progress. We are, as I stated in my remarks, we do face an unprecedented wave of migration. More than 1 million people in Germany, about 200 million of people camping in Greece, dozens dying every day in the Mediterranean Sea trying to cross from Libya. We haven't seen that since a long time. Probably the refugees of World War II, that's the best example we have in mind. Or if we go further down in history, the great invasions of the 4th and 5th century. So is there a trade-off? I don't think there is a trade-off. There is a battle being fought in political circles in every European country today about the kind of things that you mentioned, which is how do we remain who we are? How do we implement our promises of asylum? How do we respond to a humanitarian crisis without losing ourselves? and especially the European project. France is very disappointed. We do regret the Brexit vote. We respect it, but we regret it, as well as we are not happy with positions expressed about migration in Hungary or in Poland, just to quote a few of my friends. But these tensions that are very difficult to understand here in Canada, because you are protected by 3 oceans, including the Arctic one, which is difficult to swim by night. Our problems and the tensions associated with these issues are such that there is no easy answer. We need to retake control of the borders for the sake of the migrants themselves. It is very important because we need to make sure that those who need asylum get it. Today in Germany and in France it's almost impossible because of the numbers that we have never seen so many files, so many requests. So we cannot deal with them. It's very different because we have had that criticism. It's very different from the case of Canada saying we take 25,000 refugees and we upload. It did that decision. The US took 0. Last year. So we uploaded that decision, but the fact of the matter was that Canadian immigration officials and global affairs officials went to Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon to choose. In Europe, we do not choose. They enter our borders. So we need to find a system by which we can vet and screen for their own sake, to find them appropriate housing. We do not deny the right of the refugees to migrate. This is the lesson of World War II. Yeah? So we do not deny that, but we ask for the possibility to give them what they need and not find ourselves in a situation where people abuse of the system, either with ill feelings, like terrorists, or for just economic reasons, because the priority should be the kids that are today in the camps and who are fleeing Daesh. So, to conclude, there's no trade-off. There's a need to retake control of the borders, external borders of Europe, not internal borders. That's why we created finally the European Guard or Frontier Corps that was created 2 weeks ago. With a budget, we should have done that years ago. But we didn't do it, so now we have a Guard Corps, we have a border to protect, and we need, that will be my last remark on that matter, we need to make sure at the political level that our democracies will not be tainted by the rejection of migrants.
By
the rejection of migrants. Okay? To be in a position to accept migration will demonstrate the added value of a democracy. These migrants flee barbarians. Yeah? That's why we need to take them. So we applaud Canada's decision. It's going now, from what I heard, it's now above, in fact, more than 30,000 have entered the country. And by the end of the year, 2016, there will be 40,000. It's a big number, but remember there's more than 1 million in Germany. Huh? hundreds of millions in Greece being now redistributed all across Europe. There will be 30,000 in France of those. While we do also get migrants from other places at the same time. So please understand the difficulty of the situation we are, and we think that we're going to deal with these migrations for many long years to come. It's not going to stop this summer.
Ambassador Chapuis, Your Excellency, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. I love your accent.
Thank you.
Continuing along the same line of trade-offs, let's talk about how much is the oil costing, how much are we paying for the oil from the troubled countries of the Middle East? It is about $3 billion a day. That is what is feeding terrorism. Can we not change our values a little bit and say no to oil from these troubled countries and no to any product that is made and manufactured, shipped, or contains even a trace of that oil, and depend in the short term on oil from the oil sands? As dirty as they are still better than funding all these armies and fighting all these wars. I'm sure these armies and all these wars must be producing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of greenhouse gases. Are we not fooling ourselves by saying we must not produce, we must not get oil from the oil sands, which can provide Western Europe for many, many years in the short term, and then we can change to either nuclear power or eventually to renewable energy. We're not doing that. I think we are simply fighting the wrong thing. When we talk about climate change, it's not going to be done unless we also consider the population explosion. Could I please have your thoughts on that? Thank you.
There's a lot of politics in your remarks, so I'm trying to stay diplomatic. First, just facts, no politics, just facts. Fact number one: the Middle Eastern wars since the 1920s have nothing to do with oil. Just not true. The French-British mandate on Syria had nothing to do with oil. And everything with post-World War I failure of the Turkish Empire to crush Europe. Let's put it that way. And then it was Israel versus the Arabs. And the failure to deal with that created the instability in the Middle East. Still today, because people forget about the situation today in Palestine and Israel, because all our minds are focused on Syria and Iraq. But this is, since the 1930s, and especially since the Exodus, this is the germ of instability. All came after, as you know, 75, 74. It came after. Terrorism is today being fueled a little bit by oil financing. We've seen that, we know it. But much more by trafficking of human beings and of drugs than of oil. So let's stop the drug trafficking and the trafficking of human beings. Yeah, that will be also a very important thing on the agenda. And these have nothing to do with oil sands. Third fact, between war and no planet, I'd rather have war. If there is a choice. There is no choice, in fact. But the death of a planet is the most worrisome challenge of humankind. because without planet, no humankind. That's as simple as that. And oil sands, sorry to say it, is a major contributor to emissions. Fourth, environmental issues in our evolved societies. We have people fighting every day in France against a new airport in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, bringing almost a political crisis in my government. You have people demonstrating against new pipelines in Canada and in the US. These are people who want a different way of life than seeing all transit. And they are respectable too. So I don't think it is through oil issues that we'll deal with terrorism, but it is through a low carbon economy that will deal with climate change. That is for sure. It is science. It's not politics. It's just science. I cannot say any more than that. I'm sorry. But I can tell you the victims of terrorist attacks in Nice do not think they died because of oil production in Iraq. That is certainly not their way of thinking. Maybe they are wrong, but I think that their mindset is very far away from the statement you just made.
Ambassador Richard Cohen. I'd like to shift the subject away from oil for a minute, perhaps indirectly. Oil does affect this, but you mentioned the four challenges facing our two countries, one of which is security. And of course, you did highlight one of the major security challenges, the threat of terrorism. And Donald Trump's assertion, notwithstanding that ISIS is our greatest threat, I think there is a more serious threat than ISIS and associated terrorist groups, and that is the existential threat, potentially, that Russia, and perhaps in the longer term China, poses to us. This is really manifests itself on the ground in Syria and Aleppo in particular, where we have the Russians and their allies bombing innocent people with apparently no reaction at all from the West, other than strong words. Over the weekend, there was a conference, I believe in London, convened by Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. And one of the things that he mentioned that it would be discussed would be the use of force against Assad and perhaps indirectly against the Russians. I'm interested to know what the French reaction would be to that, assuming that the United States, and this is a pretty perhaps far-fetched assumption, would consider this kind of action. And more broadly, what is France's view of the longer-term threat in Europe and perhaps more widely of a very aggressive Putin?
Well, the battle in the Security Council on the bombing of Aleppo was led by France and Spain, not by Britain. And we managed to get almost a unanimous vote for a very strong humanitarian resolution last Saturday. I say that in front of my Russian colleague who is among us today. There was only one veto, not two, as expected. China abstained. Very interesting that China abstained. And only Russia opposed its veto, and the only supportive about the non-permanent members of the Security Council was Venezuela, who, as you all know, is a very esteemed democracy under Nicolas Maduro. People do not eat anymore in Venezuela, as you know. We led that battle after Jean-Marc Ayrault, my foreign minister, went to Moscow. Not so many foreign ministers go to Moscow these days. Jean-Marc Ayrault went to Moscow. And he went to Washington and went to New York. Now, you may say that we have failed in New York. And it's a fact. There was a veto. Now, you may remember that France and Mexico and Canada at the time, 10 years ago, 2005, introduced the idea that there should be no veto in the Security Council on mass atrocities. And we hope that this idea will now, after the Russian veto on Aleppo, that this idea will grow in the international community. That could be a very sane rule for tomorrow's battles. These are war crimes. And those who commit war crimes will one day be judged in front of the international community. The UN Secretary General has called for an inquiry. We support that idea, and we'll be meeting with like-minded countries to continue to exert the necessary pressure. You say it's only words. I'm sorry, but diplomacy is words. Words to stop the bloodshed. Now you say Britain envisions to send people on the ground to battle who? First time I hear about that. I need to check. But I haven't seen any country willing to go on the ground in Syria unless they are Iraqis or Kurds or Syrians. So to battle through local armies, but not sending troops. Britain will never send troops to Syria. And I don't see the case. Now, why are we now at that point in time? That's the real question. Why the Aleppo citizens are being bombed? That's the question those who bomb need to answer. Because we make the difference in France between those who bomb and those who are bombed. And we are seeing right now a very simple thing. We don't care about Al-Nusra. We don't care about terrorists anymore. We don't care about the Middle Eastern history. We care about bombs and people dying under bombs. And we know that one country is in a position today to stop the bombing. And we just ask that, nothing else. Stop the bombs. That country is Russia. Now, whether Russia will listen to us or not is a question for Russia. Now, second part of your question is, do we think that what you called an aggressive Russia, and you didn't put any qualitative in front of China, but I would expect that you put them in the same basket, is a threat to the Western world? On this matter, France say no, absolutely not. Russia is a great country, has been a friend of France for centuries. The Russian people is a great people. The Chinese people is one of the most industrial people in the world, and bring to Canada, to France, and to all the international community benefits of buying power that nobody else is bringing us. It is the engine of world growth today. So we should all say thank you every morning to the Chinese economy that is financing our deficits. They have different political systems, but who is going to say this or that or point fingers while our own history is full of somber pages, let's say, dark moments. Let them develop. The China of today, I've lived in China 20 years. The China of today has nothing to do with the China of 30 years ago. It's fantastic. The Russia of today has nothing to do with the Russia of 30 years ago. It's fantastic too. Now, does Russia feel threatened? Question mark. Does China feel threatened? Question mark. The way you answer this question will bring you a very different point of view depending on how you answer the question. So talk to Russians, talk to Chinese, and see how they feel to understand why they act in some ways. The only thing we do not understand is why the bombs continue to fall on Aleppo civilians. This has to stop.
Hi, and thank you for coming to our university. It's an honor to have you here. I'd like to ask about the ideas for reform of the UN Security Council, because if you talk to different people, they're going to get a lot of different answers. Some people think that certain countries, especially France, for example, would lose their seat on the Security Council, like the permanent seat, because they've lost power. That's what some people would say. And then other people would say that you should add new countries, such as, I don't want to say Canada, but perhaps Brazil, Nigeria, India, especially Germany and Japan. And I'd like to just question what France's position would be on that regarding should there be reform at all, or should it stay the same?
Well, our position is well known, and I will repeat it for you. You'll find it a lot on the internet. If you Google France and UN Security Council reform, we are in favor of a UN Security Council reform. Because this council needs to represent better the new world, especially emerging powers. We think there should be an African seat, and we are in favor of increasing the Asian representation. And then begin the real problems. Because there are a series of questions one has to answer. First, France doesn't decide who is on the UN Security Council. The reform is global or doesn't exist. Now, we're not going to fight a World War III in order to have a reform, okay? That will be the easiest way, by the way, because that's how the League of Nations was born after World War I, and the UN system was born after World War II. And the reality of World War II was the Allies, Britain, France, US, Russia, and China, those who fought Nazism. That's why Germany is not on the council. One should remember why. Why Japan is not in the council. One should remember why. History has a price. Okay? Now, when you ask, when you put, because we have 5 veto powers. Now, you ask China about Japan getting on the UN Security Council. They say, you are dreaming, Never, ever. Block it. You ask France, come on, you're with Britain, let's have a European seat, France, Britain, Germany, Slovenia. No. Come on, let's be serious. For 2 reasons now. We will be in 2 years the only European member of the Security Council. Huh? Ah, that's important. You know, Brexit has a price. So if someone has to get out, it's not us. Okay? But we want our British friends to remain. Why? Because in reality, that's the main question to answer for all those who want to enter the UN Security Council. Is that there is a responsibility associated to it. And if you look at the modern world today, 2016, who is on the ground keeping the peace? Who? Apart France? Who? Not China, not a single soldier answer. Not Russia. Not the US anymore. Retreating from Iraq. And if you listen to the presidential campaign, both candidates have said we have to get out of all this. Or Trump says some have to pay us to go. Nobody is paying France to go. Huh? So the responsibility to keep international peace warrants a seat on the Council. That's why, despite all the terrorist attacks we have been the target of, we have today about 10,000 troops, soldiers outside of our borders keeping international peace. And we are shedding blood every day. Not for us, for all of us. That's the difference. So yes to the reform. If the reform brings new blood in the Council, who will join the international effort for peacekeeping. And what Canada is doing today, re-engaging the peacekeeping operations, is a very interesting sign. That commitment that Canada is back, quote unquote, will of course support its campaign to enter the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member in 2022. Because it will, Africa is looking at that with a lot of interest. And it is very good news because I must tell you, French troops feel sometimes a little bit alone in the desert of Kidal. Now, there's no swimming pool, sure. There are lots of drones that explode, and traffickants and bandits and rogue elements. It's very dangerous, but we do it. Of course, we have our own interest of security. We talked about migrations. We need to avenge the attacks that were on our soil, but we need more support. And what we say is that all those, I repeat myself, all those who want to enter the common post of peacekeeping should provide the troops and hardware. We need helicopters, we need doctors, we need development projects, we need lots of things in these peacekeeping operations. And thanks Canada for doing it. It's a little bit, but it is very important.
Bonsoir, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Ça nous fait très, très plaisir de vous écouter ce soir. My question has to do with values and with the transformation of the economy towards a lower carbon economy. As you know, Canada exports about $125 billion a year of oil and gas, and we're in a low growth scenario. We're also on our way to missing our climate objectives by 40 or 50%. How do we engage Canadians and our friends around the world to transform this economy? Do we go first towards productivity and efficiency to sort of try and start where people are, or do we take a moonshot approach and say, the only thing that we can afford to do in terms of economic investment and innovation in Canada for the next 5 years is to focus on climate change and making our economy a low-carbon economy? How big do we go?
As big as your ambition is. It's not easy. clearly. And your question, Céline, show how uneasy it is. And it's not the French ambassador in Canada who is going to tell either the Canadian government or the Canadian people what they have to do. It's up to them to decide what they want to do. I will talk about my country on these issues. Because we face the same problem. We have voted a law, which is called La Loi sur la transition énergétique, the law on energy transition, that try to tackle the questions you mentioned, how much oil, how much nuclear power, how much investment in innovation, and how long will it take, and how we're going to fulfill our targets, which, by the way, are in the same basket as the EU targets. So it's not national anymore, it's regional. And the way we do that today in France, after a very difficult public debate, is the idea that prosperity is linked with a low-carbon economy. That the old economy, the non-digital, not green economy, is the economy of low growth. And that economy has no future. So if we want to have a future of growth, we need to invest into digital on one hand and low carbon or zero carbon on the other. And the earliest, that's why I talked about early birds. Those who take the lead will reap the benefits. So it's a marathon, but at the same time, it is a sprint. We need to be in front of the others. And I will just take one example from Canada, which is a very good sign of what is happening right now in this country and is not publicized. Enbridge, the third oil company in this country, third by in terms of money, has decided to invest this year up to $5 billion, Canadian dollars, in renewable energy in France. Interesting. Why do they do that? First, we welcome that. It's new money. It's real money. Some will say it's oil money. But it is oil money that is decarbonated, if I can use that neologism. They want to have less carbon in their portfolios. They need to diversify their investment because they know that the carbon road goes in front of a cliff and there's nothing beyond the cliff. So they know to spend all their oil money in renewables before they reach the end of the cliff. And they do that towards France, which is good news because that shows the alliance between France and Canada on renewables. And it shows that the fact that EDF, Électricité de France, our main electricity state provider, has opened for foreign investment all possibilities to invest, and we're getting Chinese investment, we're getting Canadian investment. That is very good news. So let's do that, let's do more of that. Let's publicize also all the courageous innovators who are working today on the new technologies that will create the jobs of tomorrow. People can complain on relatively low-paid jobs in Alberta, but I'm amazed to see that in that same province of Alberta, like I'm seeing in French provinces, you have startups and companies that come with innovative solutions for central heating, for energy economies, for renewables that will allow to displace the jobs. And the fact that we'll have your university, Carleton, and many others in the country will have to train the new generation on these new jobs is also, I think, a very good incentive to give hope to the families that these will be jobs of the future, jobs with great added value attached to them.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now,
Thank you very much, Larry. Merci beaucoup, Excellence, d'avoir bien voulu vous joindre à nous ici à l'Université Carleton en cette soirée d'automne un peu pluvieuse, par contre, mais merci beaucoup d'être parmi nous. The range of the topics that you addressed tonight is quite phenomenal, quite impressive. We went from the common challenges shared by France and Canada to some of the issues that are between our two nations to much broader issues dealing with security at the European level, and more broadly, even with kind of issues of changes or renewal of the UN Security Council. I was struck, although it didn't come back, I was struck by one thing you said in terms of the common challenges of Canada in culture, perhaps because of the sharing element that we have. In a sense, you made quite a point of saying that culture would not be commodified. If you think of this in a trade agreement context, if culture is not commodified, then the reason for protectionist measures on cultural items disappears at some level or changes dramatically. Because part of the way we've used to think of trade agreements in the cultural products within trade agreements is because of an implicit assumption of commodification. If it's not commodified, then the whole perspective of how we should think of culture in trade agreements, such as CETA, changes quite dramatically. So I'm not sure how to handle this, but it was very interesting. Minor point to what you said, but I think quite an interesting one. So again, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for sharing your views with us. As you can see, in spite of the rain and in spite of the competition that you mentioned, you managed to draw quite a crowd and wonderful questions. So merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Thank you.